Hello, everyone, and welcome to this really special session of Calgary's webinar series, presented this time in partnership with the Calgary Stampede. I'm Deborah Yedlin, and I'll be your moderator. If you've participated in one of our previous webinars, welcome back. And to all our new viewers, thanks for joining us. Horses are central to every Calgary Stampede, and they are crowd favorites. And while Stampede isn't happening this year, we wanted to get to know our Stampede horses a little better. So today we're joined by two guests, equine specialist Dr. Renaud Léguillette and the 2020 Stampede Parade Marshal Filipe Masetti Leite. Dr. Léguillette is a professor in Calgary's Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and holds the Calgary Chair in Equine Sports Medicine. His research program focuses on inflammatory lung diseases, including HEAVs and inflammatory airway disease, as well as in equine sports medicine. He also has a long history of working with horses at the Calgary Stampede. He'll start us off with a short presentation about these magnificent animals, as well as the science and research that goes into caring for Stampede horses to keep them feeling well and performing their best. And then we'll hear from Filipe Masetti Leite, who began an incredible journey through North and South America in 2012. Since then, he has traveled 25,000 kilometers across 12 countries and on 2 continents, all of it on horseback. From his adopted country of Canada, Masetti Leite rode to his native Brazil, then on to Ushuaia, Argentina, the very tip of South America. And last year, he once again set off on horseback from Alaska with the goal of returning to Calgary to complete his trip in time for the Stampede, and he made it. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. The webinar will be available on demand, and we'll email you a link once it's online. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're recording this webinar on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Now let's turn it over to Dr. Léguillette. Welcome and thanks for joining us, and I apologize for not getting your pronunciation of your name right off the bat. So to start your presentation, we'll see some of your previous research that you have conducted at the Stampede. Over to you.
Horses are so much more superior to us. They are incredible athletes. Like, we're nothing compared to these horses in terms of athletic capacities. I'm working at the University of Calgary, the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, and I'm here with the chuck wagon racing people doing a research project on heart monitoring and fitness evaluations on the chuck wagon horses. Really, our interest is to look at the electrical activity of the heart, and we're even more interested into how this electrical activity varies, if it's normal or abnormal. And we're also looking at blood electrolytes. So we take some blood before the races and as soon as possible after the race with an electrocardiogram transmitter monitoring system. So to do that, we put some stick-on electrodes on the horses. The transmitter sends this information to a cell phone that is attached to the wagon. So we have a transmitter and a cell phone for each horse. So we have on the wagon 4 transmitters and 4 cell phones. And the cell phones have a GPS system in them. And then we can see in real time on the same screen the 4 horses live. And so for each horse we have the heart rate, the speed at which he's moving, and the electrical activity of the heart. We give this feedback right away after the races or training to the driver.
I was hesitant at the start. I didn't know how much stress it put on the horses.
Renaud did a very good job with taking care of the horses when they're handling them and everything. So in the end, yeah, I thought this would be good for me to try too.
It provides us with really good information on fitness, recovery rate, a heart rate of a horse, whole new aspect to the sport. It's, we're in the technology world and the information world. All of the drivers are welcoming.
Well, I think the level of care of these horses is really, really extremely high standard. Very exciting. It's first, and thanks to the collaboration with Calgary Stampede, and the drivers were amazing. They were so keen and interested. I think it's a good thing. I want to see wagon racing survive, and I want to be around here for about 30 years. I'm hoping so. With this testing, I hope will help out keep the wagon racing around and show that these horses are fit and ready to go when they go on the racetrack.
All right, thank you, Deborah. So, very briefly, I wanted to explain a little bit what are the adaptations and how come those horses are able to do, those outstanding performances. They jump very high, they run very fast, and they run over very long distances. And like Filipe can attest for sure. So, horses have legs designed for efficiency of locomotion. They have giant lungs to uptake a maximum amount of oxygen. They have their own blood doping system naturally. And they have giant hearts to move these, this blood. And so, of course, this is really a very efficient and fine-tuned, physiology, but things can go wrong. So, I wanted to go over in the next slide some of these adaptations and show you briefly what we're talking about and how how horses are so well adapted to these performance. So if you look at that picture of a horse, you can see that basically, contrary to humans, where we have the calf muscle down at the bottom of the leg, those legs are just basically four thin sticks, basically. So all the weight is up above the legs. There is no muscle to move like our calf muscles back and forth. So this is light and very efficient. And on top of it, on the right side of the screen, you can see that this is a representation of the anatomy of a leg. It's a gross representation, but what happens is every time the horses are hitting the ground and putting some weight on those legs, there is a spring system. So they're really like kangaroos, if you want, where all the tendons in the back of the leg are stretched every time the horse is putting weight on those legs. And this is free energy. So just putting weight on will stretch the spring, and the spring will return that energy and bounce back and lift a little bit the leg. So this is very efficient to move, and the horses don't have to carry up and down the weight all the time. The springs are helping them a lot. But to move those legs, they need fuel, and so they need oxygen. So on the next slide, we can see that oxygen goes into the lungs of the horses. So on the left side, you can see the size of those lungs. So I basically put a picture of a lung over a drawing of a horse. And people have to realize that when they put a saddle on the horse, they are basically sitting on the lungs. The lungs are, the chest of the horses are very, very long. They have more ribs than humans. And so those lungs are just basically like a big vacuum cleaner, like a big pump to suck up the air. And so in red, I show that the air, instead of going, from the bottom of the neck and straight into the lungs, is actually has to go from the nose all the way through the head, so the upper airways, the throat, and down into the lungs. So there's a long distance between the nose of the horse and the lungs. And so when these pumps are pumping so much air, basically the air has to go through the nostrils, and we did some modeling, and we worked with some engineers and looked at inside the nose, you know, the shape of those nasal passages. And this is the graph at the bottom right. So you can see it's very, very complex. It's a very strange and very complex shape. It's almost like modern art. It's very beautiful, I think. And this is the space for the air to move into the nose of those horses. And this is also optimizing the air coming in versus the air coming out of the nose, so that there is less impact, you know, when the air goes in and out. So everything in horses is optimized to move huge amounts of air. And once you have this air in the lung, on the next slide, you can see that the oxygen from the air is going into the red blood cells. And so what happens on that picture, you can see, so these are two blood tubes from the same horse. The tube on the left, basically we took some blood, and that was actually a Stampede horse at rest. The horse was quiet, everything was good. You spin down the blood, and so the red blood cells are gonna, you know, pack at the bottom of the tube. So that dark red, black is really the amount, showing you the amount of red blood cells. Then you run the horse, you take some blood just at the end of the race, and this is the tube on the right. And obviously you can see that the number of red blood cells increase hugely. And so this is what we mean by their own blood doping, basically. This is the dream of any human Olympic athlete. They try to train in the mountains, live under hypoxic tent. They do everything they can to increase just a little bit their amount of red blood cells. The horses will just double it like this naturally, without, you know, without anything, like just naturally. And so then on the next slide, you know, overall, all these adaptations, they have also a giant heart and all these things. But if we look at what is the limiting factor, you know, what is really preventing horses to go even faster, even, you know, work for longer. And it's really the respiratory system. So they, you know, you could give them more heart, more blood, wouldn't change much. But if you were giving them more lungs, they would actually go even faster or run longer. And this has been shown, it's this, you know, crazy picture from the early 80s. So definitely another type of era, but this guy was Dr. Barry Grant. He's a veterinarian, a researcher at Washington State back in the days. And he was riding those race horses who had a catheter in the neck in an artery. And as he was going full speed on the track, he was pulling syringes of blood and throwing them on the side of the track for people to measure the amount of oxygen in the blood. And that's how he showed that horses are low in oxygen when they run. And those levels of oxygen are so low that if yourself had the same amount of oxygen in your blood, we would rush you into a hospital emergency care. But horses with that amount of oxygen keep running. So it's incredible. So on the next slide, so you have basically, I like to think of, you know, simplify the horses physiology into, you know, big areas. So of course you have the muscles, of course you have the legs, but my research interest is really what's going on with the throat, the lungs, and the heart. And so many things can go wrong, unfortunately, in all these areas. And also, you know, you can have leg issues. And so the research we do on the next slide, for example, is an example is we looked at water treadmill. We've done quite a lot of work on water treadmill because some people will train their horses in a water treadmill because it's gentle on the impact on the leg, and it's, you know, making them work a little bit harder. And so it's really very good to condition them without having, you know, to have impact on the legs. And so on the left side, you can see the difficulties of, you know, research on horses. You have all these wires going onto one leg of a horse, and we're measuring the impact on the legs when they walk in the water. And on the right, we have another research where we were tracking the movement of the leg when they were walking into the water treadmills. And this reminds me also that, unfortunately, we had the same kind of project as the one on the left, where we wanted to work with the Calgary Stampede before the COVID hit us, where we had a project plan in collaboration with Calgary Stampede to optimize the safety of the track. And so the plan was actually to improve the track conditions and get the ideal track conditions so that there was a least amount of impact on those legs and less, of course, injuries. But with COVID, everything is on ice right now. So another example on the next slide of type of research we do is horses, again, difficult to do research on them because they run fast, and if you want to look inside them, you need very specialized equipment. So, and you need to be creative. So this equipment is a camera called an endoscope. And you can see on the top left picture, the endoscope going onto the nose of the horse, inside the nose, and watching the throat. And on the left, you have a rider with a backpack, and I can view and record the video with the screen. And on the right, this is a chuck wagon driver, Mike Vegan, actually at the Calgary Stampede during training sessions, where we were looking into the throat of one of his chuck wagon horses. So you can do it on those horses in live, natural situations. And at the bottom, you can see on the left, a wide open throat. You can see that black hole where the air goes through, totally normal. And on the right, you can see an extreme case where actually the hole is all, plugged basically. And that's what's happening in this horse during racing or running, and only when he runs. So we had to catch it live when the horse was running with this equipment during, a run. On the next slide, we looked at the throat. Then if we go down and look at the lungs, horses can have, for example, asthma. So that's one of my interests for research. So here you can see some students, passing a small tube in the lungs and then flushing in and out some saline to look at what's inside the lungs. And if you remember the smoke from the fire, the bushfires last year, this is on the right, under the microscope, the type of things we could find in those lungs. That's horrible. So all these arrows are showing, some dark bluish particulates. So these are pollens and particulates only due to the smoke inhalation. So all that stuff is actually accumulating in the lungs of these horses. And if you remember the previous few slides, when we said that the lungs are the limiting factor, it means that any small decrease in the lung capacity or lung function will have an impact, a severe impact on how they run. And, sometimes we think horses are like humans, so we like to try treatments, same as in humans. So we have the same, nebulizers or flow vent and puffers that you use on people with asthma. We use the same on those horses with this kind of creative devices. And next slide. This is my last one. So really, this is to show that research to understand better and improve the safety of those horses and improve the training is really difficult to do because, again, horses are big animals, 500 kilos, very fast. They run, 60 plus kilometers an hour. And how do you do that, right? You're not going to run behind a horse with your equipment. That's not going to work. And you're not going to, have wires and cables. So there is two options. One on the top left is when you have a high-speed treadmill and you run the horse on the treadmill, the horse is running in front of you, and then you can have, take some blood or do some measurements on how they breathe. But the other option that we use in Calgary, and I've used in my research group a lot, and we're only 2 in the world to be able to do that, is really on the track with that equipment that is on that picture at the bottom right, where you have a mask on the horse to measure how much air they move, how much oxygen they use. We have also a heart rate monitor, same as the chuck wagon, and the GPS. And so now we understand the heart, the lungs, and we can see if medications or if pathologies are affecting or optimize the training too of these horses and how it affects their exercise physiology. So that's really the brief introduction I had. The next slide is some acknowledgement because of course this doesn't happen. It's not just me, it's a lot of international collaborations. a lot of graduate students. Money is of course the key, and we're very lucky we have some people donating to the Calgary chair, so that's great. And most important is the equine community. The horse people in Alberta are absolutely fantastic. Chuck wagon, polo, barrel racing, all the Western performance people are always very keen on, you know, having us do some research. And I must say, this is a strength of what we're doing, is we're able to, you know, enroll and many horses easily in our studies. And that's really, you know, the strength of the horse community in Alberta. And that top picture is just showing the fun part of the job, when you can have a chuck wagon ride with Logan Gorse here, who won the Calgary Stampede last year.
That's great. Thank you, Renaud. And just before we hear from Filipe, we're going to watch this short video about his journey to becoming this year's Calgary Stampede Parade Marshal.
Last year, I journeyed to Canada's north, the Yukon, to try and find who I chose as the 2020 Calgary Stampede Parade Marshal. I was excited to give him the news. Why the Yukon? Well, this year's Marshal is an extraordinary story of adventure. An adventure currently on its final leg. Sadly, this year's Stampede won't be happening. But the story of Filipe Masetti deserves to be told. In July, when he arrives in Calgary, he will have completed an incredible journey. A journey that started 8 years ago, right here at our Stampede Centennial. From North through Central and South America, over 25,000 kilometers, across 12 nations, helped by the generosity of thousands, all on the back of a horse. Filipe!
Hey, I can't believe you came out.
Hey, great to see you.
Man of your word.
Hey, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
when I thought about leaving and going on this long ride, living this dream, there was no other place I could have left from but the Calgary Stampede. Can't believe it. I'm finishing where I started.
Yeah,
It's
well,
like a dream. It's insane.
we want to celebrate with you. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate with you than by having you lead the 2020 Calgary Stampede Parade.
No way. You want me to be the marshal?
Absolutely.
Oh my God, sir. Thank you so much. To be named the Calgary Stampede Parade Marshal is just like, it's the biggest honor of my life. Like, I love Western heritage, and the values that I've learned have made me who I am today. The first dream was to ride from Canada to Brazil. You know, I did that. It took me 803 days, 16,000 kilometers. A city called Barretos, where the largest rodeo in Latin America happens. Dreams can come true. Look at this arena. Just before I got to the end, I knew something inside of me said I had to go to Ushuaia, southern tip of South America. And then you need to finish off the Americas now, and you need to finish off in Calgary. And every single day I had to knock on a stranger's door and ask for help. And every single day I received help. Whether they had everything or they had nothing, they gave me what they had. And that's the most beautiful thing, and that's something I want to share with people, you know? And we need to trust each other.
Filipe Masetti is an inspiration, now more than ever. He embodies what Calgary and the Stampede are all about. Western values, resiliency, and community spirit.
Being the parade marshal will give me a voice to tell all these stories that I've learned and these experiences I've had, and to continue to help. Without the help of the people in these 12 nations I've crossed, I wouldn't have ridden one single kilometer.
The finish line is in sight, and Calgary awaits. Filipe Masetti, your 2020 Calgary Stampede Parade Marshal. 8 years in the making.
Filipe, we have some photos from your journey. Can you tell us about them that we're going to show on the screen as we scroll through?
Yeah, thank you so much, Deborah. Thanks for the opportunity. Great meeting you through Zoom here, Renaud. I'm a huge fan of his work and what he does for us cowboys and, you know, people that live this Western culture. It's so important, you know, showing technology and the amount of work and money that goes into keeping these horses safe, you know. So it's very important. Thanks to the University of Calgary as well and the Calgary Stampede. Yeah, this photo right here, I'm on my horse, Bruiser, one of the quarter horses that I traveled from Canada to Brazil on. We spent 803 days together in the saddle through 10 countries on that first journey. From Brazil, as the video stated, I continued on to Ushuaia, the southern tip of Argentina. As far as I could go, I went until the land stopped. That second journey, I raised funds for a Brazilian Children's Cancer Hospital. And when I got there, I was like, you know what, now all that's left for me to travel is the north. So last year in May, I started the final part of this journey from Alaska back to Calgary, where everything began. And to me, just hearing Dr. Renaud speak and the experience I've had with these horses, you know, they are way stronger than we are. They are way more intelligent than we are. And I'd like to share just two stories that for me was just magnificent about these horses. This horse that I'm riding right now, Picasso, I'm arriving in Ushuaia. I suffered a lot on my first journey with borders. It's extremely hard to cross borders with horses these days. You know, quarantine, exams, money, bureaucracy, you get to Latin America and corruption comes into place. So my second journey, I did each country with its own horse. And this horse, Picasso, came from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I rode him all the way to the southern tip of the country in Ushuaia. So a winter in Buenos Aires, the temperature would be around 5 degrees, maybe 0. It wouldn't snow. And when we got to Ushuaia, it was minus 16. There were several feet of snow. And I was amazed to see that this horse who had grown up in the province of Buenos Aires and had never encountered such a hard winter. By the time we got to Ushuaia, his fur, his coat was the same size as an animal that was born on the island. So the adaptation of these animals, you know, I took them through Central America. We're talking about 45 degrees with the humidity, extremely hot. I crossed the Chihuahua Desert, one of the largest deserts in the world. I crossed jungles. I crossed cities and towns and places that were freezing, and how adaptable they are, you know, and it happens very quickly. It doesn't take 1 or 2 winters. By the time he got down there, like, he already knew that the winter he was in for was going to be a lot harder than what he had experienced his entire life. And the second thing that really got me is their sixth sense for wild animals. You know, this last trip, I was riding by 3 grizzly bears a day at times in the Yukon and Alaska. But on my first journey, that horse that we saw at the beginning, Bruiser, and here they are, Frenchie, Bruiser, and my third horse. At one point in Montana, one day early in the morning, they just stopped. They stopped. They didn't want to keep going. They didn't want to walk. And I hadn't showered for 10 days, sleeping in my tent. I was in a bad mood. I'm like, come on, boys, don't do this to me now. We got to keep going. And they started getting nervous and they started getting agitated. They wanted to run back where we were coming from. All of a sudden, they put their little ears forward, and this grizzly just comes screaming out of the forest, crosses the road in front of us, and continues on. Had we continued walking at the same pace that we were going, we would have been right in line to where that grizzly came out. So they smelled that bear way before I saw it. And they were telling the idiot on top that we needed to stop and wait or we were going to get killed. So my horses literally saved my life throughout the past 8 years. I traveled through 12 countries, more than 25,000 kilometers. And to finish off in Calgary, where everything started, to me was just a dream. I cried a lot. You know, I feel like I left a trail of tears as I rode towards Calgary. It was a very emotional moment. You know, the emotions just poured out of me because it was a very, very, very hard project to undertake, dream, journey. But I had my horses with me the entire time. And today I can honestly say that my horses made me a better human being. I have learned so much from them. I am who I am today thanks to these animals. And I was able to see firsthand how strong they are. There was no mountain that they couldn't cross. There was no river they couldn't swim. There was no desert that they couldn't fight their way across and get to the other side. So I'm very thankful and to have had this experience. And today I value the horse much more than when I started this journey 8 years ago.
And you have a lot of stories to tell us. And this is you coming into Calgary. That's a great photograph.
Yeah, it's a beautiful photograph, and I think it kind of captures the emotion I was feeling. I got Dana Pierce next to me, the president of the Calgary Stampede, who entrusted me with this project. You know, a lot of things could have happened when he invited me to be the parade marshal. This was a year ago when I was still in the Yukon,
Right.
and you know, a lot of things could have happened from the Yukon to Calgary. A lot of things could have happened from Cochrane to Calgary. You know, I literally
Absolutely.
rode in to the parade. Like it wasn't like I got here a week before.
Yeah.
I rode 27 kilometers on the last day. The day before, I crossed Cochrane. So I'm very thankful and very blessed to have Dana in my life. And Clara is behind me there with the beautiful shirt, the beautiful woman in the beautiful shirt. And that's a really cool story as well. You know, the horse has awarded me some of the greatest presents of my life. You know, I pay my bills thanks to the horse today. But the biggest present the horse gave me is this love that I met in Patagonia. I met Clara in a little town called El Bolson in Patagonia, Argentina. And, you know, we've been together for 3 years now. She accompanied me through this final stretch from Alaska to Calgary, and to share this with her was just phenomenal. And behind us, we have the mounted police unit here in Calgary. And I can't thank the city of Calgary enough. All of the volunteers from the Calgary Stampede, everyone that came out on the streets without knowing what the route was, because we couldn't share it. People young and old were out there yelling, "Welcome home, Filipe, welcome home." And it was such a special moment for me. But again, the police that helped us, you know, ride the final 27 kilometers safely. I was on 2 wild horses from the Okanagan. This is the first time they had seen a city the size of Calgary. So the volunteers, the Calgary Stampede, and the police helped us arrive safely. So I'm so thankful and very blessed.
Thank you for those, for your presentation. And thank you, Renaud, for yours. I'm going to start just before we start to get our questions coming in. I'm going to start with Renaud in terms of what kind of research specifically you had planned for the Stampede this year and how it differed from what you were looking for in your research last year.
Yeah, so this year was really looking at what kind of what can you do to improve the safety on the track, and definitely, you know, there are lots of, you know, measures in place already, but one parameter, and again, it's all based on science. So, you know, like there is many tracks that have done studies to look at what can you do to help safety usually with horse racing, and one parameter that you can control relatively well is the track itself. And so, you know, a good track, a bad track, and so really the goal of the Stampede was to improve the track this year. And on my side, I thought, well, you know, there is things we can measure to help you put some evidence and science behind it. And, you know, if a track is too deep, too soft, it's not good. And obviously, if it's too hard, it's not good. You're going to have, you know, lesions sometimes more on the bones or more on the tendons, depending. And so we thought, well, we'll do measurements. And so the goal was to, and we have done like very basic pilot studies, testing some equipment, making sure everything was working, and then poof, COVID hit. So we have done, you know, basically the goal was to put some accelerometers. So there are small, tiny sensors that are at different level on the leg of the horses, and they measure basically not the force, but the impact, the deceleration of the leg when it hits the ground. And so we wanted to help the Stampede optimize a track with those devices. And that was, again, a collaboration. It's not me, it's not my specialty, but, you know, we have at the University of Calgary, great people in kinesiology, and they do that on humans, working on shoes and things like that. So we got a team together, and we were on board with the horses and the Calgary Stampede to do that.
So you'll have to wait till next year. Or are you going to try and do some work in the interim to apply it next year? Is that possible?
Well, again, there are ongoing discussions. There is, you know, a lot of personnel issues and budget cuts and everything. So of course, I'm motivated, and, you know, just give me access to the track and I'll do it. But it's not, again, a one-man affair, you know, like you need a team. And so that's the issue. Yeah.
So I just want to clarify something. You talked about the low oxygen levels on the horses. You said 68%. Is that the same thing as the O2 saturation levels that we talk about for humans?
So the percentage is the saturation, and this one is the absolute content. So this one is 68 millimeters of mercury. of arterial blood oxygen. So it's basically a pressure in oxygen. So this is very technical, but basically, you know, you should be, if you were at sea level, you should be around, you know, close to 100, let's say,
Right.
to round things a little bit. And when those horses run, instead of being close to 100, they are at 68. And like I say, you know, if I was here standing at 68, I would be quite maybe grayish a little bit, and
Yeah.
then my wife would send me to the hospital.
Sure. And they put an oximeter on you pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's one thing, you know, horses are very tolerant again to running. So they really suck up all the oxygen they can, send it to the muscles. Those muscles are really using all this oxygen and more. You know, they could use more, but that's all they can give, and they can still, you know, function with that lower level of oxygen, because again, it's a little bit technical, but they have all kind of systems in place to be able to still function with that level of low oxygen.
And do they have the same lactate issues that humans do in terms of performance and how they use that lactic acid, or is that, do they process lactic acid differently?
They process it the same way, but what's really interesting is they are very tolerant to very, very high lactate. So lactate is really a byproduct, like an acid that you accumulate when you run, and that's why you have cramps, you know, too much lactate and then you cramp. Well, those horses, so that I have a funny story here, like Calgary Lab Services, who, you know, we collaborate with, it's a human lab, very well known in the area. Well, at some point they wanted to, you know, do some tests and calibrate the machine, and they need a high blood lactate. So there is some system in humans where you can, you know, put a tourniquet on your fingers or wrist and, you know, try to improve your blood lactate, but still they couldn't get very high. So I said, well, I'll give you some horse blood after a race, you know, instead of, you know, the blood there peaks to 25 millimole per liter, which, to give you an idea, like at rest, we're probably at 2. When we run, you know, humans, maybe 8 or something. Like those horses go up to 25 on a day, like just like that. And it's natural for them. And even more, I have like many of them above 25. So for them, it's very tolerant to this, you know, accumulation of acid and lactic acid, and no cramping. Like, yes, they can have some cramps like any athletes, but it's not a big issue for horses. Yeah.
So Filipe, what kind of challenges did you face with your horses on all your journeys? I mean, you know, Renaud's telling us about some challenges that the horses face. What kinds of issues did you have to deal with, if any?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of issues. You know, horses are very strong, but at the same time, you know, when you're out there by yourself in the middle of nowhere, I had to be a bit of a vet. I had to be a farrier. You know, their feet, taking care of them. They're walking on top of pavement and rocks. And, you know, I had a horse in Guatemala. I woke up and the farmer was trying to be nice. And he was like, I gave each horse a lot of corn this morning. It'll be great. I'm like, oh, no, they're not used to eating corn. And, you know, so I had a horse colic and had to make him walk all day. And finally, at the end of the day, I managed to get some Benamine from a small village. And yeah, he defecated and he was okay. But a lot of challenges. I had a horse that was hit by a truck in Mexico. Luckily, we managed to save him. And, you know, but it took a lot of saline into his blood and a lot of different medications. And he was very scared. He didn't want to eat. I literally had to feed him for a month, like the hay in his mouth. But eventually he got better and we were able to continue. So yeah, a lot of challenges on the road. And when you're going a long ride like this, you kind of have to become, like I said, a bit of a vet and a farrier, because you're always in the middle of nowhere.
So if you didn't feed them corn, what did you feed them?
So the horses ate on the first long ride. I was by myself, so they ate what we found. Usually, you know, pastures, and we just put hobbles on them, let them eat for several hours every day. I spent a lot of time with the strategic planning of this ride. I spent 2 years speaking to long riders around the globe before I took the first step, and reading as much as I could on how to safely travel with horses. So they all told me, you know, you got to let your horses graze 2 hours before, 2 hours at the end of the day, and how many hours to ride a day. day and how many kilometers. And then when we get to a town and we'd rest, you know, I'd buy alfalfa and get them, you know, excited again and energy and give them vitamins if that's what it took. But like I said, you really get to see how strong these animals are when you do what I do. And the other thing is that it's very natural. You know, horses have walked their entire lives to find water and feed and to move with the weather and the temperature. And so what I did was very natural for them.
So, you know, when you talk about the longevity and what they can tolerate, Renaud, how long can a horse train and compete in events like the Calgary Stampede? Is it year after year? Is it a couple of years? And I guess the other question to add to this is, you know, you've been using microchips. They've been implanted in the chuck wagon horses since 2011. So how's that helped the performance of the horses and maybe the longevity?
Yeah, so the chips were not to help with performance, but more again for safety and tracking, follow the kind of effort the horses were doing. So really, like I can talk for the chuck wagons, for example. I mean, these are even almost retired race horses. So that's, you know, in the racing world, the flat racing, horses race young, you know, because that's where they have the best prizes and the more, you know, athletic capacity. But then, you know, the chuck wagon horses are a little bit older than those flat racers. So it's very common to have, you know, chuck wagon horses 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 and more year old, versus that's almost impossible in the flat racing situation. So they do actually have year after year a long career. So for them, it's really more than a second chance. It's really a long career, and that's, you know, maybe because, you know, they don't carry a jockey and they have less injuries with these kind of issues, for example. So yes, they, you know, some great horses have done many years of racing as, you know, chuck wagon horses. Less the case with the flat racers for sure. And the chip was really to monitor, they are not allowed to race, you know, for example, 10 days in a row at the Stampede.
Okay.
So they'll let them, you know, do 3 races in a row, for example, and then they need some rest, or, you know, but usually it's rare. Again, those horses, those races are so competitive that horses have kind of a specialty, if you want. Some are more for what they call the inside barrels, and some are more for the, you know, so if you have the number 1 and 2, you'll have one type of horses, and the barrel number 3 and 4, you'll have another type of horses. So again, because of the rotation of those numbers, horses usually don't race very much more than 2 days in a row, but the chiefs were there to control that.
So, and just the difference in performance and stress between the chuck wagon horses and the outriders, like what's the difference? Have you studied the difference, the stress impact of the chuck wagon horses versus the outriders?
Yeah, no, and that was one of the first questions I had when I arrived in Calgary and saw the chuck wagons, and it's a project I've never done. But yeah, absolutely. You have the weight of the rider versus pulling a wagon. So we did do a study still where we looked at the force, the pulling force, if you want, of each wagon horse. So we had some load cells that we inserted in the system, you know, between the horses basically and the wagon. And we had 4 load cells, and we measured those forces. And it's really interesting because once they are cruising on the track, there is not a lot of forces, you know, like it's not very hard for them to pull that wagon, and that's why they're going so fast. But what's interesting is it's almost the same as the weight of a rider. So you're talking 75, equivalent of 75 kilos, if you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Question for you, Filipe. Somebody just, first of all, bravo for this incredible undertaking and all the work that you've done to complete your journey. 2 questions this individual has. Did you listen to music, audiobooks, language programs, or would that have been too dangerous? How many times did you have to change horseshoes, cowboy boots, jeans, and hats? And what was the worst weather you had to deal with?
Yeah, good questions. No, I never listened to 20 music, because I was just always on top of my horse. You know, you have to be on top and paying attention, whether it's grizzlies or busy roads. You know, you're facing everything and anything you can imagine. And I brought a book on the first trip, and I was so tired at the end of the day, I barely had energy to brush my teeth, never mind opening a book and reading it. You know, by the time you're finished, you just want to sleep and get up at 5 a.m. to continue the day the following day. On my first journey, the 2 years and 3 months, 16,000 kilometers, I used 360 horseshoes. We switched them once a month. Yeah, by the time the month was finished, the tip was so thin, it was like paper. 7 pairs of boots. My first pair of boots are at the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And the worst weather that I got, I'd have to say, was crossing the Northern Rockies last year in northern BC by Toad River. And it was August 15th. And I woke up to like a foot of snow, -5. And I'm like, summer in Canada, eh? And it was just completely unexpected. It was very hard. And the winds of Patagonia, 120 kilometers an hour. There were days where I had to hug my horse's neck not to fly back to Canada.
And did you travel every day, or did you take a day off every once in a while? Like how did you manage yourself and your horses, I guess, or was it weather dependent?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would travel about 3-4 days and rest 1 or 2, but it was always based on the horses, how they felt, and you know, how they were doing when they were. I noticed they were tired. On a trip like this, you gotta catch the problem before it happens. If you feel like they're getting tired, you stop and you rest as long as it takes, and then continue on.
So, Renaud, a question about how the research that's been done to date, how has it contributed to the redesign potentially of the track wagons or the equivalent, the saddles, the horseshoes? Is there anything that your research has contributed to keep the horses safer and improve their performance?
Yeah, and that's really what I like into this kind of clinical applied research. It's really, you know, not just 10,000 feet high out there, you know, trying to understand things. Of course, we have that level, but also, yes, the basic and applied things. And so it did help with the training of the horses, for example, and the airways, you know, educating the people that, yeah, when the horses are making a little bit of a noise when they run, that's abnormal. Same with, you know, the lungs. Sometimes people think that, oh, you know, when I jump on the horse and start jogging and training a little bit, the horses are going to cough 2-3 times and that's normal. Well, it's not normal. That's the, like you said, Filipe, it's a little bit of the early signs, you know, that something is brewing in there and you need to catch it, because if not, it's not going to be, it's going to be worse and worse. And so these are really things that we've done it so a lot on, you know, education of the people based on the findings we have. So for throat issues, for lung issues, and also for the bleeding issues. So some horses will bleed from the lungs, and not just you know, the chuck wagon. Like, it's basically any horse running fast, including barrel racing and any other horse and jumpers and everything. And so yes, we are working on, you know, improving the prevention, the medications for that, and the medications for also asthma for the lung issues.
You know, humans are wearing Garmin's and Fitbits and Apple Watches. Are there equivalents for the horses in terms of wearables, maybe not in watch format, but in other formats that you have been using to monitor their health and performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the hot topic these days in equine research. There is, these devices do exist, absolutely. And now the big thing is about large databases where you have, for example, trainers, and the whole, you know, yard and barns, all of the horses are monitored during the training. And so they put just same as, you know, the humans, like a belt around the chest, and off they go. And that belt will record accelerometry, so the strides, heart rate, speed with GPS. But it's really based more for again, like training and conditionings of horses, not like the device we're using for electrical activity of the heart, and really the mass that we have is really also pushing the data a little bit more and more specialized with oxygen consumption. So there is some basic devices existing, absolutely, wearable devices, absolutely right now. Even things you can put on the saddle pad and look at, the strides again and the movement of the horse and calculate even the energy expenses, same as humans. Yeah.
So Filipe, just a question just tell us where you're from originally, whether, how you prepared yourself for this journey, and quarter horses, you've done this, you're a long rider. Have you chosen the same kind of horse every time you've been on a journey, or have you changed the kinds of horses that you've used?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Brazil, a small town near Sao Paulo. And I'm not sure, my video's not working, eh? When I talk, you just hear my voice.
No, we can see you. We can see you.
Oh, we can see you, nice.
Yeah.
And the horses that I've used were given to me, they came from the universe. When I started this, I was just a kid with a dream. I just graduated from journalism at Ryerson, and I didn't have money to buy anything. So I spent 2 years planning this journey. Part of it was, strategic planning. What route am I going to take? How many kilometers can I ride a day? Everything that I said before, speaking to these long riders, it's very important to hear from the horse's mouth, quite literally. And then the other part was acquiring everything I needed, from saddle to pack saddle, to permits and to the horses. So the first trip I rode 2 quarter horses that came from Montana. And then I was given a third horse, a Mustang, from the Taos Pueblo indigenous people down in New Mexico. I arrived with the 3 in Brazil and retired them. And then, like I said, the second journey from Brazil to Ushuaia, I did each country with its own set of horses, because the borders are so hard to cross on horseback, and especially in Latin America. I had to spend a lot of money due to the corruption. You get to borders and they don't have a form to give you, and then that's when the problems begin. And this last journey, I did it with 2 wild horses from the Okanagan region of Canada, Smokey and Max. Mac was already trained, and Smokey I trained him myself. And I have to say, out of all the horses I've used, I used quarter horses, Criollos, and Mustangs, wild horses. And I have to say that for what I do, the wild horse, the Mustang, is the best horse. They're so rugged, they're so strong, they get hurt way less, they eat less, they drink less. It's a horse that it's survival of the fittest, generations and generations of them fending for themselves. And the domesticated horse today, we've bred the feet from underneath them. We breed them to look beautiful, we breed them to run, we breed them to be agile and in the sports arena. But what I do requires a tank of a horse. It has to be rugged, it has to be strong, and it doesn't have to be a beautiful horse or be very fast. All it needs to do is walk. So the wild horses, their bones are so strong and so big, and it's amazing for what I do.
So Renaud, are you surprised by what Filipe just said about the different kinds of horses that he prefers?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Actually, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely. The extreme I worked with are the endurance horses, where, those are small Arabian horses, and they do those races where they go for 160 kilometers in incredible times, and with an average of over 20 kilometers an hour. Filipe, so that's insane, right? But yeah, no, that's great to hear, because I totally agree. That makes perfect sense. And that's actually what we see on the other side of the fence, here. Absolutely.
I just want to say cyclists do 160 kilometer rides too. They call them Grand Fondos. Little different though. I'm curious as to how you picked your names, Filipe, for your horses, Max, Smokey, Picasso, Bruiser. Was that just inspiration on any given day, or did somebody name it for you?
They came with the names, and I don't have the heart to change a horse's name. It's like a child. If you adopt it, you can't change his name. It'd be weird. But
when you had, we had the 2 quarter horses and you added the Mustang, did you see, how did that sort of dynamic work? Did it change? Did you have any challenges integrating a third horse of a different kind of strain?
No, they accepted him pretty quickly, but it was interesting to see that, the Mustang, he was like the police horse, if I put them on the field, like, and there was other horses, the 2 quarter horses would always stay close together. and the Mustang would stay here floating so that no one would get near the herd. And the Mustang was also way stronger. Like, I had a lot of problems with the quarter horses. Like I said, they have very thin legs, and, you know, sometimes they hit it so softly on the panel and it swells up, and you got to give them, you know, anti-inflammatory injections and wait and rest. And one time I saw my Mustang roll off a mountain. He rode 3 times, and I was like, oh my God, he's going to die. He gets up, he shakes the dust off and starts grazing. And I was like, oh my God, they're so rugged. They're so strong. It's unbelievable. And he was an asset to the journey. He adapted way better to the weather of Central America. The quarter horses, you know, it was very hard for them with the heat, the humidity. And he was just like, oh, whatever. It's going to be hot. Oh, okay. Put some sunscreen on my nose. I'll be good to go.
Just give me some water. I'll be happy. No, I have there's a question that I find interesting. They want to know, our listeners wants to know what the mechanism that, if you've figured out what the mechanism is that allows horses to increase the amount of red blood cells from just running them. Is there a storage or a production mechanism? Like, you know, every human athlete wants to know the secret. What's the mechanism?
Yeah. Well, there is no hope for humans because they do have a reservoir. So the reservoir is the spleen. So they have a gigantic spleen that goes all along the left side of their belly, basically. And that spleen is filled with extremely rich blood. They're rich in red blood cells. And anytime they have a stress, or it's like the flight, or, you know, every time they have to run, some small muscles are going to squeeze that spleen, and those red blood cells are going to go in the bloodstream.
So yeah, we have to grow a bigger spleen then if we want to have any sort of that advantage.
But it's interesting because I was actually recently looking at all literature in humans, and apparently humans can do that, but they will increase their red blood cells by less than 1%, right. And horses will increase it by 100%.
Right. Yeah, that exponential increase is not fair. Filipe, we're getting towards the end of our webinar. So final question to you. You've said that you're ready to stop doing these, being a long rider. You're a journalist, you said. You graduated from Ryerson. What's next for you?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I was very realistic when I started this last long ride, and named it Last Long Ride for that reason. You know, I'm 33, and physically I could do this for the rest of my life. You know, it gets hard on the knees sometimes, your lower back, but, you know, you sleep in a bed for 2 nights, take a shower, and you're ready to go again. The problem is your soul, you know, the mental. Doing these kind of trips is like going to war, you know, like figuratively and literally. In my first long ride, I saw 2 people shot dead, witnessed a man trying to kill his wife with 5 gunshots, stayed in the home of drug lords. And then with all 3 trips, I almost died several times, almost lost horses. So mentally, I just, you know, I value Filipe. I'm a very personal person. I like to talk, and I want to have kids one day and not be the crazy guy that's throwing cats at them, you know? So for my mental health, this is my last long ride, and I'd like to focus on journalism. I just released my 2nd book. It became a bestseller on Amazon. It's called Long Ride to the End of the World. My first book, Last Long Ride, Long Ride Home, is going to become a major motion picture next year. So we're working on that. You know, I'm helping them out to make it as real as possible with the script and the filming. So I'm going to focus on the journalism part of it, always related to horses. Always, I love telling these stories, and I love to be a representative of the Western world and get our world into a doctor's, you know, house in New York or Sao Paulo or Paris when they're reading my book, maybe because they love adventure and they realize that we're not such bad people after all. You know, I feel like we're judged, we're misunderstood in the 21st century. And I just love raising the flag because, like I said in that video, the values that I've learned and the person I am today is thanks to having a father that wore a cowboy hat and spurs. And yeah, I'm just happy to raise the flag and represent Western culture the best I can.
Well, I want to thank you, Filipe and Renaud. Thank you so much for your time today. It was fascinating. It's a snapshot into what we're missing this year. Hopefully, Filipe, we'll see you next year in Calgary around for Stampede. And Renaud will be looking for you in the barns doing your research and watching those truck wagon horses with a bit of a different lens. So thank you both very much. It's been great. And I want to also thank the Calgary Stampede for being part of our event today. So as I mentioned earlier, everyone who signed up will get an email link with the view to be able to view this session on demand. That's all for today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.